Please don't let me die alone. Those were the words that made a homeless 19-year-old girl break the only rule that had kept her alive for 3 straight years. Emma Parker had nothing left in this world, no home, no family, no one who would even notice if she disappeared by morning. But when a dying stranger begged her not to let her die alone under a bridge outside Phoenix, Emma made a choice that would bring the most feared motorcycle club in the state straight to her by sunrise. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of the city you're watching from down in the comments. I read every single one and I want to see just how far this story travels tonight. Now let's begin. Rain almost never touched the desert outside Phoenix. Emma Parker had learned that in her 3 years living beneath the overpass on the edge of town, the sky stayed dry more nights than not, and when the wind kicked up, it usually just carried dust, not water. So when the first drops hit the cracked concrete that night, she felt it before she understood it. A change, something out of rhythm. She pulled her sleeping bag tighter around her shoulders and told herself it didn't matter. Rain was just rain. She had survived worse. She had survived men who tried to take what little she had. She had survived winters where her fingers went numb and stayed numb for days. She had survived the sound of her own stomach eating itself from the inside out until hunger stopped feeling like pain and started feeling like nothing at all. 3 years ago, Emma Parker had been a different person. She'd had a bedroom, a mother who called her baby even when she was too old for it, a future that looked at the very least ordinary. Then her mother got sick and the bills ate everything and the house went and her mother went not long after that, and there was no one left standing between Emma and the street. No aunt, no family friend who always meant to check in, just Emma, 16 years old, standing outside a house that used to be hers, holding a garbage bag full of clothes. She'd learned fast that the world did not owe her softness. She learned the rule that kept her alive. Don't get involved. Don't let anyone notice you. It sounded cold. It sounded almost cruel even to her own ears sometimes. But it worked. People who got noticed got hurt. People who tried to help got used or worse. Emma had seen it happen to others on the street, a girl who trusted the wrong outreach worker, a man who let a stranger borrow his last $20 and never saw him again. Trust was a door, and every time someone opened it, something got in that shouldn't have. So Emma stayed small, she stayed quiet, she kept her eyes down and her feet moving, and she told herself night after night that this was simply what her life had become, and there was no use grieving something that wasn't coming back. Tonight, though, the rain kept falling, and something about it made her chest feel tight in a way she couldn't explain. She sat up in the dark, listening to the water hit the overpass above her, listening to the distant hum of the highway that never really stopped, even at 2 in the morning. She thought about closing her eyes again. She thought about how tired she was, the bone-deep exhaustion that never quite left her, any more the kind sleep didn't fix. And then she heard it, a sound like the world tearing. Metal shrieking against wet asphalt, a single violent impact that rattled through the concrete under her and up through her spine. Then silence, the kind of silence that felt louder than the crash itself. Emma froze. Every instinct in her body told her to stay exactly where she was. Whatever had happened out there was not her problem. It could be dangerous. It could be a trap. It could be nothing at all, and she'd be a fool to go running toward the dark for no reason. Don't get involved. She repeated it to herself like a prayer. Don't get involved. Don't get involved. But then she heard something else. A voice thin, broken, barely carrying over the rain. Help! Somebody, please! Emma's hands curled into fists inside her sleeping bag. She told herself it wasn't her responsibility. She told herself that whoever it was had people looking for them, had a phone, had resources she didn't have. She told herself a dozen reasons to stay still. And then without deciding to, she was already standing. Her legs moved before her mind agreed to it. She grabbed the only jacket she owned, the thin, faded thing that had stopped being warm 2 winters ago, and pulled it over her shoulders as she climbed out from under the overpass into the rain. The cold hit her first, then the sound of her own heartbeat hammering so loud she wondered if it could be heard over the storm. She followed the voice. What she found stopped her dead in the middle of the road. A motorcycle massive, heavier than anything she'd ever stood this close to, lay on its side back wheel, still spinning uselessly in the rain. And underneath it, pinned from the waist down, was a woman, 50s maybe, silver-streaked hair plastered to her face, blood running from a gash above her eyebrow, thinning out pink in the rainwater, pooling beneath her. Emma's breath caught somewhere in her throat, because the woman was wearing a leather vest, and on the back of that vest, even soaked through and half obscured by mud, Emma could make out the shape of it. The patch, the insignia, Hell's Angels. Every story Emma had ever heard on the street came rushing back at once. Bikers who didn't call the cops when trouble found them, they handled it themselves. Bikers who protected their own and made outsiders disappear. A world with rules Emma didn't understand and absolutely did not want to be a part of. She took a step back. This isn't my business. This isn't my world. Whatever happens to her isn't on me. The woman's eyes opened, found Emma's face in the dark, and what came out of her mouth wasn't a demand, wasn't an order, wasn't anything Emma expected from someone wearing that patch. It was a whisper, small, human, terrified. Please, the woman said, her voice cracking on the single word, please don't let me die alone. Emma's whole body went still. She had heard people beg before. She had heard people cry, curse, plead with greed, plead with strangers, plead with anyone who might listen. But she had never heard anyone say those exact words to her. Not help me, not call someone, but don't let me die alone. As if being alone was worse than the dying itself, Emma knew that fear. She had lived inside that fear for 3 years. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of disappearing and no one even noticing you were gone. And in that moment, standing in the freezing rain over a woman wearing the patch of the most feared motorcycle club in the state, Emma Parker made a decision that broke the only rule that had kept her alive. She knelt down in the mud. I'm here, Emma said. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm right here. The woman's hand found Emma's wrist and gripped it with more strength than Emma expected from someone this hurt. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Emma said, already scanning the road, already thinking, already moving past the fear into something colder and even more useful. We need to get this bike off you. It's too heavy, and the woman said. You're just a kid. I'm 19, Emma snapped more out of reflex than anger, and something in the woman's expression shifted surprise, maybe at the fire in her voice. And I'm not leaving you under here. Just hold on. Emma's eyes swept the roadside searching. No phone, no tool, no help coming, not for miles, not on a back road like this in the middle of the night. She spotted a length of rusted metal piping, half buried in the gravel shoulder debris from some old construction project forgotten and left to rot. It wasn't much, but it was something. She grabbed it and jammed one end under the frame of the motorcycle. What's your name? The woman gasped, teeth chattering. Emma, she said, throwing her weight against the pipe. Nothing happened. The bike didn't budge. Emma, the woman repeated like she was trying to hold on to the sound of it, like a name was a rope she could grip while everything else slipped away. I'm Victoria. Okay, Victoria. Emma adjusted her grip, planted her feet wider in the mud, and shoved down on the pipe with everything she had. I need you to try to move even a little the second this thing lifts. It won't lift, Victoria said. It's too heavy, you'll hurt yourself. I don't care. And she meant it. In that moment, kneeling in the freezing rain beside a stranger, wearing the mark of a world Emma had been taught to fear her entire life on the street, she genuinely did not care what it cost her. She threw herself against the pipe again. Her palms tore against the rusted metal. Her knees ground into broken asphalt hard enough to draw blood through her jeans. Her arms screamed with a kind of effort she hadn't asked of her body in longer than she could remember. Not since before the street, not since before hunger had taught her to conserve every last ounce of energy she had. The bike shifted an inch, then stopped. Come on, Emma gritted out more to herself than anyone. Come on. She adjusted her stance, found a better angle, wedged the pipe deeper under the frame, and drove down with her whole body weight behind it, legs back, shoulders, everything she had left. The bike lifted 3 inches off the ground. Now Victoria moved now. Victoria cried out in pain as she dragged herself sideways, inch by agonizing inch, her injured legs scraping against the wet road. Emma held the pipe with everything she had, arms shaking, breath tearing out of her in ragged gasps, every muscle in her body begging her to let go. Just a little more. Just a little more. I'm clear, Victoria gasped. I'm clear. Let it go. Emma released the pipe. The motorcycle crashed back down onto the road with a sound like a gunshot, and Emma collapsed backward into the wet asphalt chest, heaving, hands shredded, and bleeding arms trembling so hard she could barely hold herself upright. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was only rain and breathing and the distant hum of the highway that hadn't stopped once through any of it. Then Victoria let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Emma crawled towards her, ignoring the pain screaming through her palms, and pressed her hands against the gash on Victoria's leg, where blood was pooling fastest. "I need something to stop the bleeding," she muttered mostly to herself. She didn't hesitate. She pulled off her own jacket, the only jacket she owned, the one piece of warmth she had left in the world, and pressed it hard against the wound. "No," Victoria said weakly, "you need that." "You need it more right now," Emma said, and there was no room for argument in her voice. Victoria stared up at her, rain running down both their faces, and something in her expression changed, something that looked almost like disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Victoria whispered. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Emma kept pressure on the wound, refusing to meet her eyes, because if she looked up right now, she was terrified of what her own face might show. "Because you asked me not to let you die alone," she said quietly, "and I know what that feels like, being alone when it matters most." Victoria went silent at that, just watched her, this stranger, this girl half her age, kneeling in the freezing rain, soaked through, bleeding from her own hands, giving up the only jacket she had. "What's your name again?" Victoria asked, though she'd clearly heard it the first time. It felt like she needed to hear it twice to believe it was real. "Emma," she said again. "Who are you, Emma?" And there it was, the question Emma had been asked before in different words by outreach workers and shelter staff, and the occasional stranger who slowed their car to stare. "Who are you?" As if her answer mattered, as if anyone actually wanted to know. Emma looked down at her torn, muddy clothes, at the blood on her hands that wasn't hers, at the version of herself that the world had decided to stop seeing 3 years ago. "No one," she said quietly. "I'm no one." Victoria's hand found hers again, gripping it despite the pain radiating through her own body. "No," she said, her voice suddenly firm, cutting through the rain and the exhaustion and the shock. "You're not no one. You're the one who stayed when everyone else would have kept walking." Emma didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever put it to her quite like that before, not as pity, not as charity, but as a simple, undeniable fact. In the distance, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then closer. Someone must have called it in. A passing car, maybe? Or a resident who heard the crash from a house Emma couldn't see in the dark. Whatever the reason, help was coming, real help, the kind with lights and stretchers and hospitals. And that was the exact moment fear crawled back into Emma's chest. She had no ID, no address, no explanation that wouldn't invite questions she didn't want to answer. If the police showed up and found a homeless girl covered in a stranger's blood, kneeling over an unconscious biker on a back road at 2 in the morning, she knew exactly how that story would be told. She knew exactly who would end up in handcuffs, or worse, in a system that had already failed her once. "They're coming," Victoria murmured. Her eyes were starting to flutter, consciousness slipping. "I know," Emma said. "Stay," Victoria whispered. "Please stay until they get here." Emma looked at her, really looked at her, at the blood, at the fear in her eyes, even now, even as help was minutes away. And she understood something in that moment that she wouldn't be able to put into words until much later. Victoria wasn't just afraid of dying. She was afraid of being alone in a moment that mattered. Emma understood that fear better than anyone. "I'll stay until I hear the sirens turn onto this road," Emma said. "I promise." The sirens grew louder. Red and blue light began to bleed faintly into the black sky somewhere down the highway, still distant, but coming fast. "Emma," Victoria said, and her voice had gone soft, fading with the effort of staying conscious. "Thank you. Whatever happens after this, thank you." Emma held her hand until the ambulance lights turned onto the road, flooding the wet asphalt in red and blue. And then the second the paramedics' headlights swept close enough to catch movement, Emma did the only thing she knew how to do. She let go of Victoria's hand, and she ran. She didn't look back. She didn't wait to be thanked, didn't wait to be questioned, didn't wait to see if Victoria would survive the ride to the hospital. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sound of sirens faded behind her, until she was back beneath the overpass where she belonged, cold, soaked through, without a jacket, without anything but the memory of a stranger's hand gripping hers like she was the only solid thing left in the world. Emma sat down in the mud beneath the bridge, pulled her knees to her chest, and shook not entirely from the cold. It's over, she told herself. You did what you could, now it's done. Tomorrow it'll just be another night like every other night. She almost believed it. She had no way of knowing that 4 hours away in a hospital room bathed in fluorescent light, a woman named Victoria Hayes was about to wake up, and the first words out of her mouth would not be about the crash or the pain or the motorcycle that nearly killed her. They would be about a homeless girl with nothing to her name who had knelt in the rain and refused to let a stranger die alone. Michael Hayes had been asleep for less than 2 hours when the phone call came. He'd spent 30 years riding beside Victoria, not just as her husband, but as her equal, her partner, the man who stood at her side through every mile of a life most people would never understand. In all that time and all those years, he had never once heard his phone ring at that hour without his stomach dropping straight through the floor. Mr. Hayes, the voice on the other end was calm in the practiced, careful way that hospital staff train themselves to sound. This is Phoenix General. We have your wife here. She's been in a motorcycle accident. Michael was already pulling on his boots before the sentence finished. Is she alive? She's stable, she's asking for you. He didn't remember the drive. He would tell people later that 30 minutes disappeared from his memory, completely swallowed whole by fear, and the only thing that came back to him clearly was the moment he walked through the doors of the ICU and saw her bruised, bandaged, one leg elevated, and wrapped in IV taped into the back of her hand, and she was awake. Victoria. His voice broke on her name in a way it hadn't broken on anything in years. Michael. She reached for him, wincing, and he was at her side in an instant, gripping her hand like he might lose her all over again if he let go. What happened? The bike? Did someone hit you? Was there another rider? Michael, Victoria's voice cut through his panic, quiet but insistent. There's something I need to tell you before anything else. He stopped. Something in her tone made the room feel smaller. There was a girl, Victoria said. A homeless girl. She found me on the road. The bike was on top of me. Michael, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I thought... Her voice caught. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die out there alone in the rain. Michael's jaw tightened, his grip on her hand instinctively firmer. But you didn't. Because of her, Victoria said. She could have kept walking. She could have pretended she didn't see me. God, Michael, she saw the patch. She saw exactly who I was, exactly what that patch means to people who don't know us, and she still came. She lifted the bike off me with a piece of scrap metal. She gave me her own jacket to stop the bleeding. And when the ambulance came, Victoria's eyes filled, and Michael had not seen his wife cry in longer than he could remember. She disappeared. She didn't even give me her last name. Just Emma. That's all I have. Emma. Michael sat in silence for a long moment, processing not just what had happened to his wife, but what it meant. 30 years in this life had taught him plenty about people. He'd met men who claimed loyalty and folded the second things got hard. He'd met so-called friends who vanished when trouble showed up. And here was a girl with nothing, no home, no money, no reason at all to risk her own safety, who had thrown herself into danger for a stranger wearing a patch that most of the world crossed the street to avoid. She ran before you could even thank her, Michael said slowly. She didn't want anything, Victoria said. That's what got me, Michael. She wasn't looking for a reward. She looked like she was terrified we'd want something from her. Michael's mind was already moving, already turning the pieces over. In his world, debts mattered. Loyalty mattered. And somewhere out there in the cold was a 19-year-old girl who had just placed herself in the debt column of the Hells Angels without even meaning to, a debt she would never come asking to collect. I want to find her, Victoria said before he could say it himself. Not to give her money and walk away, Michael. I want to know who she is. I want to understand how a girl with nothing left in the world still had that much left to give. Michael leaned down and pressed a kiss to his wife's forehead, steadying himself against the fear that had gripped him since the phone rang. Then we'll find her, he said. I promise you that. By sunrise, word had already spread through the club. Michael stood at the head of the clubhouse. A dozen members gathered around him, coffee going awed in their hands, faces tight with the particular kind of focus that came when something mattered, really mattered, not business, not disputes, not the usual grind of running a chapter. This was personal. A girl saved Victoria's life last night, Michael said. Homeless, 19 years old, maybe younger. Blonde hair. She goes by Emma. That's all we've got. That's not much to go on, said Diesel, one of the senior members, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Then we make it enough, Michael said. I want every shelter checked, every soup kitchen, every corner where people go when they've got nowhere else. She's out there somewhere, and I intend to find her before the day's done. What do we do when we find her? Someone asked. Michael thought of Victoria's face in that hospital bed, the way her voice had cracked, not from the pain of her injuries, but from the memory of a stranger's hand holding hers in the rain. We make sure she knows, Michael said, that somebody in this world finally noticed her. The room fell quiet at that, and one by one engines began to roar to life outside the clubhouse, a dozen riders setting out into the Phoenix morning with a single purpose, hunting not for an enemy, but for a ghost. A girl who had given everything she had to a stranger and asked for nothing in return. None of them knew yet just how much more there was to find. Emma didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay beneath the overpass, soaked and shivering, without her jacket, replaying the last few hours over and over in her mind. The crash, the patch, the woman's hand gripping hers, the sirens, the running. It's over, she told herself, again the way she'd told herself 100 times already. You did a good thing. Now let it go. Tomorrow's just another day. But some part of her, some quiet, stubborn part she tried to bury 3 years ago, didn't quite believe that. Some part of her kept hearing Victoria's voice. You're not no one. You're the one who stayed. By the time the sun came up gray and pale over the desert horizon, Emma forced herself to move. She always did the same thing at dawn, checked on the others. There was an unspoken network beneath the overpasses and behind the shopping centers of Phoenix, a scattered handful of people the world had stopped seeing, and Emma had made it her quiet secret habit to look after the ones who needed it most. She found old Walt first exactly where he always was, propped against the same chain-link fence he'd claimed as his spot for longer than Emma had been on the street. His breathing was ragged this morning, worse than usual. You eat anything yesterday? Emma asked, crouching beside him. Walt shook his head weakly. Wasn't hungry. Emma knew that was a lie. Nobody stopped being hungry out here. They just stopped having the strength to look. She reached into the small bag she kept, and the one thing besides her sleeping bag she never let out of her sight, and pulled out half a sandwich she'd been saving, wrapped carefully in a torn plastic bag. She'd planned to eat it herself that morning. She hadn't eaten since the day before. She handed it to him without a word. You need this more than I do today, she said, echoing, without realizing it, the exact words she'd said to Victoria hours earlier about the jacket. Walt took it with trembling hands. You're going to starve yourself, taking care of everybody else, kid. I'm fine, Emma said, the same automatic answer she gave every single time anyone asked. She checked on 2 others that morning before returning to her spot beneath the bridge. A woman named Carol, who'd been coughing for weeks and refused to see anyone about it, and a teenage boy barely 15 who'd run from a group home Emma suspected wasn't the kind of place a kid should be running from. She didn't have much to offer any of them. A little food, a little company, the simple, quiet reassurance that someone had noticed they existed. No one out here knew that about Emma. Not really. To the world passing by in cars and buses, she was just another face beneath a bridge, invisible, forgettable. But to the small, hidden community of people who had nowhere else to go, Emma Parker had quietly become something else entirely. She had become the one person who never stopped showing up. She didn't think of it as anything special. It was just what she did. It was the only thing that made the days feel like they meant something, the only thing that kept the numbness from swallowing her whole. She had no idea she settled back beneath the overpass that morning, exhausted and hungry, and still shaking from the night before, that a dozen motorcycles were already fanning out across Phoenix in search of her. She had no idea that a woman named Victoria Hayes was lying in a hospital bed, gripping her husband's hand, describing her to every member of the club in careful, desperate detail. She had no idea that the rules she had broken the night before, don't get involved. Don't let anyone notice you had already set something in motion that could not be undone. By mid-afternoon, one of Michael's men, a broad-shouldered rider named Cruz, pulled his bike to a stop near a gas station 2 miles from the overpass where Emma slept. He'd been asking the same questions all day, at every shelter, every diner, every corner store within a 10-mile radius, and mostly getting the same answers. Shrugs, blank stares, the occasional nervous shake of the head from people who'd learned the hard way not to talk to strangers about who came and went on the street. But this time an older woman sweeping the sidewalk outside the station paused when he described the girl. Blonde, 19 maybe 20, thin, quiet, kind. There's a girl who watches out for the folks under the bridge on Route 9, the woman said slowly, eyeing Cruz's leather vest with open suspicion. Brings food when she's got it. Doesn't talk much. Why, what's she done? Cruz felt something settle in his chest, the particular certainty of a man who'd finally found the thread he'd been looking for all day. She hasn't done anything wrong, Cruz said. She saved somebody's life last night. We just want to say thank you. The woman studied him a moment longer, weighing his words, weighing the seriousness in his eyes. Route 9, she said finally, under the overpass past the old feed store. That's where she stays. Cruz was already swinging his leg back over his bike before she finished speaking. 2 miles away beneath that very overpass, Emma Parker sat wrapped in her sleeping bag, staring out at the gray afternoon light, utterly unaware that the world she'd spent 3 years trying to disappear from had just found the one thread leading straight back to her. She thought the night before had been the end of something. She had no idea it was only the beginning. Cruz cut the engine 200 yards from the overpass and walked the rest of the way. 30 years of riding had taught men like him that a motorcycle roaring towards someone hiding from the world only ever did one thing: it made them run faster. He saw her before she saw him. A girl thin as a coat hanger curled into a sleeping bag against a concrete pillar, blonde hair matted from the rain the night before. The moment his boots hit gravel loud enough to carry her, head snapped up, and in half a second, she was on her feet, bag clutched to her chest, eyes darting toward every possible direction she could run. Easy, Cruz said, raising both hands, palms out. I'm not here to hurt you. Who are you? Emma's voice came out sharper than she meant it to, but sharp was better than shaking, and right now she needed sharp. Name's Cruz. I ride with Michael Hayes. He said it slow, watching her face for recognition. Victoria's husband. The name hit her like a physical thing. Emma took a step back, egg still hugged to her chest like a shield. I don't know anyone named Victoria. You pulled a 300-pound bike off her in the rain last night, Cruz said. Gave her your jacket, held her hand till the ambulance came, then disappeared before anybody could get your last name. Emma's jaw tightened. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, and yet her feet stayed planted because some small, stubborn part of her needed to know one thing first. Is she alive? She's alive, Cruz said. Banged up bad, broken leg, cracked ribs, concussion, but alive. And the first thing she said when she woke up wasn't about the pain. It was about you. Emma said nothing. She'd learned that silence was safer than hope. She wants to thank you, Cruz continued. That's it. That's the whole reason I'm standing here. I don't want anything, Emma said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Tell her I don't want anything. I didn't do it for... She stopped herself, jaw working and eyes hard. I just did it. That's all. Cruz studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened in a way Emma didn't trust. That's exactly what she said you'd say. Then she doesn't need to see me, Emma said. She's fine. I'm fine. We're done. She turned to walk back beneath the overpass, and Cruz let her go 3 steps before he spoke again. You know what my first thought was, he said. When I heard a homeless girl saw the patch on Victoria's vest and still stopped to help her. Emma didn't turn around, but she didn't keep walking either. I thought there's no way that's true, Cruz said, because most people, they see us coming, they cross the street. They see that patch, they think trouble, they think stay away. You saw it in the pouring rain in the middle of the night with nobody watching, and you still got down in the mud and did something about it. He paused. That's not nothing, kid. Whatever you tell yourself, that's not nothing. Emma's shoulders were rigid, her back still to him. People like me don't get to matter, she said quietly. That's just how it works. Says who? She spun around, and for the first time something raw broke through the careful blankness she wore like armor. Says everyone, says every shelter that turned me away because they were full. Says every person who stepped over me on the sidewalk like I was trash somebody forgot to pick up. Says every social worker who promised to call and never did. Her voice cracked, and she hated that it cracked. Hated that this stranger was standing here watching her come apart. So don't tell me I matter. I know how this goes. People say nice things and then they disappear or they want something back, and I don't have anything left to give. Cruz didn't flinch, didn't argue, just let her finish. Then he said quietly, "Nobody's asking you for anything, Emma. We're not those people, but you don't even know me." "No," Cruz agreed, "but I know Victoria. 30 years I've known her, and in 30 years I have never once seen her cry over anybody who wasn't blood." He let that sit. "She cried over you, a girl she met for 10 minutes in the pouring rain. That tells me something about you, whether you believe it or not." Emma's throat tightened. She looked away, blinking hard, furious at herself for the sudden sting behind her eyes. "I have to go check on someone," she said abruptly, and it wasn't a lie, it was an escape route, and they both knew it. "I'll walk with you," Cruz said. "I didn't ask you to. I'm asking myself." Emma glared at him, but something about the steadiness in his voice, no pressure, no demand, just a quiet insistence that wasn't going anywhere, made her turn and start walking without another word of protest. Cruz fell into step a few feet behind her, giving her space, and for a while neither of them spoke. They found old Walt exactly where Emma had left him that morning, except now he wasn't sitting up against the fence. He was slumped sideways, half his sandwich untouched beside him, his breathing shallow and wet, in a way that made Emma's stomach drop the second she saw him. "Walt!" She dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering, unsure where it was safe to touch. "Walt, hey, look at me!" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Emma," he rasped. "Chest feels wrong." "Wrong how?" "Tight. Can't..." He gasped, a wet rattling sound that made Cruz step forward instinctively. "That's not exhaustion," Cruz said, already pulling his phone from his jacket. "That's his heart or his lungs. He needs an ambulance now." "He doesn't have insurance," Emma said, panic edging into her voice. "He doesn't have anything. They won't..." "They'll take him," Cruz said firmly, already dialing. "Hospitals can't turn away an emergency. Doesn't matter what's in his pocket." Emma pressed her palm flat against Walt's back, trying to keep him upright, trying to keep him breathing, her own hands trembling. "Stay with me, Walt. You hear me? Don't you dare quit on me now." "Wasn't planning on it," Walt wheezed, and even now, even gasping for air, there was a flicker of stubborn humor in his eyes that made Emma's chest ache. Cruz barked directions into the phone cross streets, landmarks, how bad it looked, while Emma held Walt steady, murmuring to him, keeping him talking, keeping him anchored to something other than the fear closing in on both of them. "Ambulance is 6 minutes out," Cruz said, crouching down on Walt's other side. "You're doing good, old man. Just breathe." "Feels like somebody's sitting on my chest," Walt muttered. "Then tell them to get up," Emma said, forcing a shake into her voice that sounded almost like a joke, because Walt needed something to hold on to besides the fear, and humor was the only rope she had left to throw him. It worked. He huffed out something close to a laugh, and it turned into a cough, and Emma held him through it, refusing to let go, even as her arms shook with the effort. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes, not 6. Paramedics moved fast, efficient, sliding Walt onto a stretcher while firing questions. Emma answered as best she could. His name, roughly his age, no known allergies, no. She didn't know his last name. She'd never asked. She'd never needed to. "You family?" one of the paramedics asked, glancing at Emma. "No," Emma said. Then after a beat, quieter, "Yes, kind of." The paramedic didn't push it. He just nodded and kept working. As they loaded Walt into the back of the ambulance, his hand shot out and caught Emma's wrist with surprising strength. "You'll come," he asked, fear breaking through the gruffness for the first time. "To the hospital? I don't know anybody there." Emma's heart clenched. "I'll come," she promised. "I'll find a way, I swear." Walt's grip loosened, and the doors closed, and the ambulance pulled away, with its siren cutting through the afternoon, and Emma stood there in the sudden quiet, breathing hard, hands still trembling. "How were you planning on getting there?" Cruz asked gently. "You don't have a car. Buses don't run out this far till evening." Emma's jaw tightened. She hadn't thought that far. She never let herself think that far because plans required resources she didn't have, and resources she didn't have were just one more reminder of everything she'd lost. "I'll walk," she said. "It's not that far." "It's 11 miles, Cruz said. "I've walked further." Cruz studied her for a long moment, then pulled a second helmet off his bike, one Emma hadn't noticed him carrying. "Get on," he said. "I'll take you." Emma stared at the helmet like it might bite her. "I don't get on motorcycles with strangers." "Smart rule," Cruz said. "But you got down in the mud for one of us last night without knowing a single thing about who we were. Feels like it's our turn to return the favor." Emma hesitated, every instinct she'd built over 3 years screaming at her to refuse to walk away to keep the wall up. But Walt's face flashed in her mind, scared alone, and asking if she'd come, and she thought of every night she'd promised herself she'd never leave anyone to face something alone the way she once had been. She took the helmet. The ride to the hospital was the first time in 3 years Emma had moved faster than her own 2 feet could carry her, and something about the wind tearing past her face, the engine roaring beneath her, made her feel for just a few minutes like the person she used to be, someone who moved through the world instead of hiding from it. They arrived to find the ER waiting room half full, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and Emma's stomach twisted the second they stepped through the doors. Hospitals had never been kind to her. The last time she'd sat in a place like this, she'd been 16 years old watching machines fail to save her mother, and the memory rose up so fast and so sharp it nearly knocked the breath out of her. "You okay?" Cruz asked, noticing the way her face had gone pale. "I'm fine," Emma said automatically, the lie so practiced it came without effort. A nurse at the front desk gave them Walt's stations after a few tense minutes of asking stable, but they were keeping him overnight for observation, a cardiac event they were still running tests to fully understand. Emma exhaled relief, loosening something tight in her chest. "Can I see him by, family only right now?" the nurse said, not unkindly, just tired the way hospital staff often were by mid-afternoon. "I told him I'd come," Emma said, and her voice cracked on it in a way that surprised her. "I promised him he wouldn't be alone." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "I'll let him know you're here. That's the best I can do right now." Emma nodded, throat tight, and sank into one of the waiting room chairs, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with how much she'd been holding together all day without a single second to fall apart. Cruz sat down beside her, quiet for a moment, then said, "You do this a lot. Take care of people out there." Emma shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. "Somebody has to." "Why you come?" "Because nobody else does," Emma said, and there was no self-pity in it, just fact, flat and simple, the way she'd say the sky was blue. You get used to it. People walk past, people pretend not to see. After a while, you either become one of the people who pretends, or you become the person who stops. You stopped. "I didn't have a choice," Emma said quietly. "I know what it feels like to be invisible. I couldn't do that to somebody else. Not if I could help it." Cruz didn't say anything for a while. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than before. "Victoria's going to want to hear that." Emma's head snapped up. "I'm not going to see her." "Why not?" "Because," Emma stopped, searching for the words, frustration bleeding into her voice. "Because people like her, people like you have this whole world, this whole thing you're a part of, and I don't fit into it. She's grateful right now because it's fresh, because I saved her life, but that fades. Gratitude always fades. And then, what? Then I'm just some homeless girl standing in the middle of a life I don't belong in." "You think that's what this is?" Cruz asked. "Some polite thank you that expires." "I think that's what everything is," Emma said. "Eventually." Cruz leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "Let me tell you something about the woman lying in that hospital bed," he said. "Victoria Hayes has buried 2 brothers to this life. She sat in waiting rooms exactly like this one more times than I can count, waiting to hear if somebody she loved was going to make it. She doesn't do gratitude that expires. In 30 years, I have never known that woman to say thank you and mean anything less than forever." Emma didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened just slightly, just enough to notice. Before either of them could say anything else, Emma's phone, an old cracked thing she kept only for emergencies, charged whenever she could find an outlet, buzzed in her pocket. She almost never got calls. Her stomach dropped as she checked the screen. Tyler, the 15-year-old boy she'd been quietly looking out for. She answered immediately. "Tyler, what's wrong?" His voice came through, fast, breathless, scared. "Emma, they found me. The group home people, they're here. They've got a cop with them. They're saying I have to go back." "Emma, I can't go back there. You don't understand what happens." "Where are you?" Emma was already on her feet. "Behind the laundromat on 5th. "Emma, please." "I'm coming. Don't run, okay? Running makes it worse. Just stay calm. I'm coming." She hung up, hands shaking, and turned to find Cruz already standing, watching her with quiet understanding. "Another one who needs you," he said. It wasn't a question. "A kid," Emma said, already moving toward the door. 15. Ran from a group home for reasons I'm not going to explain to strangers, but trust me when I say he had good reasons. They're trying to take him back right now. I'll drive you, Cruz said. Emma hesitated only a second this time before nodding, and they were back on the bike tearing through Phoenix streets with a new kind of urgency, Emma's heart hammering the entire way, terrified of what she'd find when they arrived. They found Tyler pressed into the narrow gap between the laundromat and a chain-link fence, a police officer and a heavy-set group home administrator standing a few feet away, the administrator's voice carrying sharp and impatient across the lot. This is exactly the behavior we can't have, the woman was saying. He's a runaway. He needs to be back in a structured environment before... He's a kid who's scared, Emma said, striding forward before she could stop herself. Have you asked him why he ran? Or did you just decide he was a problem to collect? The administrator turned, eyebrows raised at the sight of Emma, disheveled, still in yesterday's torn clothes, clearly homeless. Clearly not someone whose opinion carried any weight in her eyes. And you are someone who actually listens to him, Emma said, which is apparently more than anyone at that group home bothers to do. This isn't your business, the administrator said coolly. You need to step back before I have the officer remove you. Ma'am? The officer said, glancing between the two of them, clearly trying to keep things from escalating. Let's everybody take a breath. I'm not going back, Tyler said from behind Emma, voice shaking but firm. You can arrest me. I don't care. I'm not going back there. Why not? Emma asked him directly, ignoring the administrator entirely. Tell them why. Tell them exactly why. Tyler's eyes filled, jaw trembling, and for a moment Emma thought he wouldn't be able to get the words out. Then he said, quiet but clear, because Mr. Danvers hits us. The little kids too. Nobody believes us because he's nice in front of the caseworkers. The lot went silent. The administrator's face shifted, not disbelief exactly, more like the particular discomfort of someone hearing an accusation she'd heard whispered before and chosen not to investigate. That's a serious allegation, the officer said slowly, looking at the administrator now instead of Tyler. Children say things to avoid consequences, the administrator said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Then investigate it, Emma snapped. Actually investigate it instead of dragging a scared kid back into a place he's terrified of. How many other kids have said the same thing and gotten ignored? The officer's expression had changed entirely now, something hardening behind his eyes. Ma'am, he said to the administrator, I'm going to need contact information for your facility, and I'd strongly recommend you expect a call from Child Protective Service before the day's out. The administrator's face went pale. This is my job, the officer said flatly. And right now my job says a kid just made a credible allegation of abuse in front of a witness, and I'm not the one who gets to decide whether that's convenient for your paperwork. Tyler's shoulders sagged, relief and disbelief flooding his face all at once, and Emma reached out and gripped his shoulder, steadying him the way she wished someone had steadied her once a long time ago. You did good, Emma murmured. You did so good. The officer turned to Tyler, his voice gentler now. Son is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight while this gets sorted out. Emergency placement, a relative, anything? Tyler shook his head, and Emma felt the familiar hollow ache of watching someone else discover exactly how empty the word safety net could be. I've got him, Emma said before she could think better of it. The officer studied her, homeless, no fixed address, clearly not an approved guardian by any legal standard, and Emma braced herself for the argument. But it was Cruz who stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket. A card. Michael Hayes, he said, handing it to the officer. He'll vouch for temporary placement tonight. We've got a room, we've got food, and we've got about a dozen people who'd take a bullet before they let anything happen to a kid under our roof. Call him. He'll confirm everything. The officer looked between Cruz's leather vest, the patch on his back, and the card in his hand, and something in his expression shifted toward cautious understanding. I know Michael Hayes, he said slowly. Chapter's got a decent reputation for looking out for people nobody else will. Then you know I'm not lying, Cruz said. The officer made the call right there in the parking lot, and after a brief conversation Emma couldn't fully hear, he nodded and handed the card back. Temporary pending CPS follow-up, he said, but it's better than a group home with an active abuse allegation tonight. I'll file the paperwork. Tyler stared at Emma, eyes wide with something between shock and disbelief. I'm not going back. Not tonight, Emma said, And for the first time all day, she let herself smile small and real. Not tonight. As the administrator stormed off toward her car, muttering about supervisors and complaints, the officer lingered a moment longer, looking at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite place. "You know this kid long?" he asked. "Long enough," Emma said. "You do this a lot. Step in for people who don't have anybody else." Emma glanced at Tyler, then at Cruz, then back at the officer. "Somebody has to," she said again, the same words she'd said in the waiting room an hour earlier. And this time they landed differently, heavier, like she was starting to understand for the first time just how much weight she'd been carrying alone. They rode back to the clubhouse with Tyler wedged carefully behind Cruz Emma, trailing on a second bike driven by a member named Diesel, who'd met them partway after Cruz made a call. The clubhouse wasn't what Emma expected. No chaos, no menace, just a large worn building with a kitchen that smelled like something actually cooking, and a handful of people who looked up when they walked in, curious but not unkind. Michael Hayes was waiting. He was exactly as imposing as Emma had braced herself for, broad-shouldered, gray-streaked beard, a presence that filled a room without trying, but the moment he saw her, something in his face shifted into an expression Emma hadn't expected at all. Something close to relief. Something close to gratitude, so deep it looked almost like grief. "You're Emma," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." She held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink, even as every instinct told her this man could crush her without effort if he wanted to. "Victoria's been asking for you since she opened her eyes," Michael said. "Asking every hour practically. I told her we'd find you." His voice caught slightly. "I didn't know it would happen the same day we found out you were also out there pulling a kid out of an abusive group home." Emma stiffened, suddenly aware of how much Cruz must have told him already. That wasn't anything special. Anyone would have. "No," Michael said, cutting her off, gentle but firm. "They wouldn't have. Most people walk past things like that every single day and tell themselves it's not their business. You don't seem to know how to do that. I don't think you're capable of it." Emma didn't know what to say to that. She looked down at Tyler, who was already being led toward the kitchen by one of the other members, someone promising him a plate of food, bigger than anything he'd probably eaten in weeks, and something in her chest ached at how easily, how naturally this world had opened its doors to a scared kid who had nothing. "I need to see Walt," Emma said, suddenly remembering. "The man from the ambulance. I promised him I'd come back." "Diesel will take you," Michael said. "But Emma," he paused, and for the first time the imposing certainty in his voice wavered slightly. "Victoria needs to see you too. Not tonight maybe, but soon. It matters to her more than I think you understand." Emma's jaw tightened, the old fear creeping back, in the fear of rooms full of gratitude that would eventually curdle into obligation, into expectation, into something she'd have to pay back one way or another. "I don't know how to be around people who want something from me," Emma admitted quietly. "I've never had anyone who didn't." Michael studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped low. Private, like he was choosing his words with the same care he'd give a wound that needed stitching. "Nobody in this clubhouse wants anything from you, Emma. I know that's hard to believe. I know your whole life has probably taught you the opposite. But I give you my word, the day you walk through that door and Victoria wraps her arms around you, there won't be a single string attached to it. Not one." Emma's eyes stung, and she hated it. Hated how close she was to breaking in front of a stranger. Hated how badly some small, starved part of her wanted to believe him. "I'll think about it," she said, which was as close to yes as she could manage. Michael nodded, accepting that, not pushing further, and something about his restraint, the way he let her keep her walls up without trying to tear them down by force, made Emma trust him fractionally more than she had 5 minutes earlier. Diesel drove her back to the hospital that evening, and this time when she walked through the ER doors, it wasn't relief that hit her first. It was dread, cold and sudden, the moment she saw the nurse's face at the front desk. "Are you here for Walter?" the nurse asked, and something in her tone made Emma's stomach drop straight through the floor. "Yes, is he okay? What happened?" The nurse hesitated, the particular pause of someone choosing words carefully. "He had a second cardiac event about 20 minutes ago. The doctors are with him now." Emma's knees nearly buckled. "Is he?" "He's stable," the nurse said quickly, "but it was serious. If you're someone he considers family, I think it would help him to see you once they're finished." Emma sank into the nearest waiting room chair, Hands pressed to her mouth, the weight of the entire day crashing down on her. All at once, Victoria, the accident, the club, Tyler, and now Walt. The closest thing to a grandfather she'd had in 3 years fighting for his life. 2 doors away while she sat helpless in a plastic chair, waiting to find out if she'd broken her promise to him without ever meaning to. Diesel sat down beside her without a word, a solid, quiet presence that asked nothing and offered everything simply by staying. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Then a doctor emerged tired-eyed and asked for Walt's family, and Emma stood on legs that barely held her. "I'm the closest thing he's got," she said, voice shaking. The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded, understanding something in her face that needed no further explanation. "He's stable for now. We've got him on medication to regulate his heart rhythm, and we're keeping him for observation, likely a few days. He was asking for you before they sedated him." "Can I see him?" "Briefly, he needs rest." Emma walked into the room to find Walt small and pale against the white sheet's tubes running from his arm, a monitor beeping steadily beside him. His eyes fluttered open when she took his hand. "You came," he whispered, relief flooding his face. "I told you I would." "Thought maybe you forgot an old man," Walt said, a faint, trembling attempt at humor. "I don't forget the people who matter to me," Emma said, and her voice cracked on the last word, tears finally slipping free after a day spent holding them back through sheer force of will. "You scared me, Walt. You scared me so bad." "Sorry, kid," he murmured, already fading towards sleep again, the sedative pulling him under. "Didn't mean to." Emma sat with him until his breathing evened out into something steady and safe, and only then did she allow herself to fully break, silent tears running down her face in the dim hospital light, exhaustion and fear, and something achingly close to love, all tangled together in her chest. She didn't hear the door open behind her. "Emma." The voice was weak, unfamiliar in its fragility, but Emma recognized it instantly, and her whole body went rigid. She turned to find a nurse standing in the doorway, and behind her, in a wheelchair, leg elevated and wrapped ribs bound tight beneath a hospital gown, was Victoria Hayes. "I heard there was a girl visiting a patient down the hall," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion, eyes already brimming. "I made them wheel me down here the second I heard your name." Emma froze, caught completely off guard, every carefully built wall she'd spent the day trying to hold in place, threatening to collapse all at once. "I wasn't ready," Emma whispered, more to herself than to anyone. "I wasn't ready to see you yet." "Neither was I," Victoria said, tears spilling freely now. "Ready for how much this would mean? But here we are." Emma stood frozen in the doorway of old Walt's hospital room, one hand still holding the frail fingers of a man she'd promised to protect, the other trembling at her side, while the woman she'd pulled from beneath a burning wreck of twisted metal the night before stared back at her from a wheelchair, with an expression Emma had never once in 3 years on the street seen directed at her. Not pity, not suspicion. Something that looked unmistakably like love. Victoria's wheelchair rolled another foot into the room before the nurse caught herself and stopped pushing. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quickly, glancing between the two of them, sensing she'd stumbled into something private. "I didn't realize you were visiting someone else, Mrs. Hayes. I can wheel you back." "No," Victoria said, eyes still fixed on Emma, voice thick and unsteady. "No, please, just give us a minute." The nurse hesitated, then nodded and stepped back into the hallway, pulling the door most of the way shut behind her. Emma still hadn't let go of Walt's on hand. She stood frozen between the two people she now, somehow in the space of 24 hours, felt responsible for, one asleep and fragile in a hospital bed, the other watching her from a wheelchair with an expression that made Emma's chest ache in a way she didn't have a name for. "I heard your name from 2 rooms down," Victoria said. "I made them stop everything and bring me here. I probably shouldn't even be out of bed." "You shouldn't," Emma said, automatically. Some old instinct kicking in, the same instinct that made her check on Walt. Every morning, the same instinct that made her hand Tyler a plate of food before she'd even sat down herself. "You have broken ribs. You could hurt yourself." "I don't care," Victoria said, and her voice cracked on it. "I've been lying in that bed for over 12 hours, wondering if I imagined you. Wondering if the girl who saved my life was even real, or if I made you up out of shock and blood loss." Emma swallowed hard. "I'm real. I can see that now." Victoria's eyes swept over her, the torn clothes, the bandaged palms, the exhaustion carved into every line of her face, and something in her expression twisted with pain that had nothing to do with her own injuries. "My God, look at you. You're hurt, your hands. It's nothing. It is not nothing, Victoria said sharper, now something fierce breaking through the emotion. You tore your hands open, lifting a motorcycle off me with a piece of scrap metal, and you're standing there telling me it's nothing. Emma looked down at her palms at the raw, scabbed lines cutting across them and shrugged in the small, defeated way she'd perfected over 3 years of pretending things didn't hurt as much as they did. I've had worse. Something about the way she said it, flat matter of fact, no self-pity in it at all, made Victoria's face crumple. How long, Victoria asked quietly. How long have you been out there? Emma's jaw tightened. She glanced at Walt, still sleeping, the monitor beside him, beeping its slow, steady rhythm, and she thought about lying, thought about giving the short, deflecting answer she gave everyone who asked. But something about the rawness in Victoria's voice, something about the way this woman had begged a stranger not to let her die alone, and then spent the next day tearing through a hospital in a wheelchair, just to find her made the lie stick in Emma's throat. 3 years, she said. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. I was 16, Emma continued. And once she started, the words came faster than she expected, like something hammed up too long, finally cracking loose. My mom got sick. Cancer. We didn't have insurance, not real insurance, and by the time we figured out how bad it was, there wasn't enough money left for treatment that actually worked. She fought for almost a year. I dropped out of school to take care of her. And then she died, and there was no family left to take me in. And the house was already gone, and by then anyway, sold off to cover what the hospital bills didn't kill first. She stopped breathing hard, surprised at how much of it had spilled out at once. I was 17 when I ended up on the street. I turned 18 under a bridge. I've been there ever since. The room went silent except for the steady beep of Walt's monitor. What was her name? Victoria asked softly. Your mother. Emma blinked, caught off guard by the question. Sarah Parker. Victoria went very still. What? Emma asked, noticing the shift immediately, the way Victoria's face had gone pale, the way her hand had tightened on the arm of the wheelchair. Sarah Parker. Victoria repeated slowly, like she was testing the name against some memory buried deep, trying to see if it fit. Did your mother ever mention anyone named David? David Reyes. Emma's stomach dropped. That was my father's name. He left when I was a baby. I never met him. My mom didn't talk about him much, and when she did, it wasn't good. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't the tears of gratitude Emma had seen a moment ago. This was something else entirely. Shock, grief, disbelief, all tangled together. David Reyes rode with this club almost 20 years ago, Victoria said slowly. Before your time, obviously. Before mine, even technically, I came in a few years after. But I knew him. Everyone who was around back then knew him. She paused, gathering herself. He talked about a woman named Sarah. Said he'd gotten her pregnant, said he panicked, said he wasn't ready to be anybody's father. Her voice hardened. He left, just like you said, and then 2 years later, he died in a wreck outside Tucson, and half this club rode out for his funeral, because whatever his failures were as a father, he was still one of ours. Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her. You're telling me my father rode with the Hells Angels? I'm telling you, Victoria said, voice trembling, that the girl who pulled me out from under a motorcycle in the pouring rain, the girl who has spent 3 years surviving on nothing while quietly taking care of every forgotten person she meets, is the daughter of a man this club buried with full honors 20 years ago. Emma, you didn't just save a stranger last night. Her voice broke completely now, tears streaming freely. You saved family. You just didn't know it yet. Emma's legs went weak, and she reached blindly for the back of a chair to steady herself. Walt's hand slipping from her grip as she processed something that felt too enormous, too impossible to hold all at once. That doesn't make any sense, Emma said, shaking her head. That's some kind of coincidence. That's not... Reyes isn't a common enough name in this club for it to be a coincidence, Victoria said. And your mother's name, the timeline, the age you'd be, she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Emma, I think you've been family to us this entire time, and none of us knew it. The door opened behind them and Michael stepped in, having clearly rushed from wherever he'd been the moment word reached him that Victoria had left her room. He took one look at his wife's face streaked with tears and Emma standing frozen and pale beside Walt's bed, and his expression shifted instantly to alarm. What happened, Victoria? Are you in pain? Do you need... Michael. Victoria's voice shook. Do you remember David Reyes? Michael went still, the name landing on him with visible weight. Of course I remember David. Rode with us for 6, 7 years before he stopped, his eyes moving slowly to Emma, something clicking into place behind them, even before Victoria finished the sentence. Emma's mother was Sarah Parker, Victoria said. David's Sarah. The color drained from Michael's face. He stared at Emma for a long, silent moment, taking in her features, the shape of her jaw maybe, or the set of her eyes, something Emma couldn't see in herself, but that clearly struck him hard enough to steal the words right out of his mouth. You look like him, Michael finally said, voice hoarse. God help me, you look just like him. Emma's hands were shaking now, the whole world rearranging itself around a truth she'd never had any reason to suspect. I don't understand, she said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to, smaller than she'd let herself sound in front of anyone in years. My whole life I thought I had nobody. I thought after my mom died there was nothing left. And now you're telling me there was this whole other family I never knew about, this whole life I could have. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence because finishing it meant facing exactly how much had been lost. How many years she'd spent freezing under bridges and going hungry and burying herself so deep in invisibility that no one would have ever thought to look for her, when apparently somewhere out there, an entire club of people existed who would have taken her in without a second thought if only someone had known to look. We didn't know, Michael said, and his voice broke on it, guilt and grief warring across his face. David never told anyone Sarah was pregnant when he left. If we'd known Emma, if there had been even a whisper that David had a daughter out there somewhere, we would have moved heaven and earth to find you the day your mother died. That's not something we say lightly. That's a promise every single person in this club would have kept. Emma pressed a hand over her mouth, the enormity of it crashing over her all at once. 3 years of hunger, 3 years of cold nights and closed door, and a world that had looked straight through her like she didn't exist, and none of it had to happen. None of it, if only the right piece of information had reached the right people at the right time. I need to sit down, Emma whispered, and Michael was at her side, instantly guiding her into a chair with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible from a man his size. Breathe, Victoria said softly, wheeling herself closer despite her injuries, reaching out to take Emma's bandaged hand in both of hers. Just breathe. We're here now. That's what matters. We're here now. Emma sat there shaking, trying to process 3 years of her life, folding in on itself, trying to reconcile the girl who had learned to survive completely alone with the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that she had never truly needed to be alone at all. Does this mean, Emma started then stopped, afraid to finish the question, afraid of hoping too hard for something that might still slip away? It means your family, Victoria said firmly. No hesitation at all in her voice. It means whatever debt you think you don't owe us, and whatever debt you're worried we think you owe, none of that exists anymore. It means you belong here, Emma. Not because you saved my life, because you were always supposed to. From the hospital bed, a weak, raspy voice cut through the moment. Well, Walt croaked, eyes barely open, clearly having woken sometime during the conversation, and listened to more of it than any of them realized. That's about the finest thing I've heard all week, and I nearly died twice today. The tension broke into something lighter, a startled laugh escaping Emma, despite the tears still streaming down her face, and even Michael let out a rough huff of laughter, wiping at his own eyes. You're supposed to be resting, Emma said, moving back to Walt's bedside, gripping his hand again, like she'd never quite let it go. Can't rest with all this drama happening 2 feet from my bed, Walt said, voice weak but warm. Girl, I always said you had somebody's blood in you. Good blood. Now I know whose. The days that followed moved faster than Emma could keep pace with. Walt stabilized, moved out of intensive monitoring, and within 48 hours was cracking jokes at every nurse who came near him. Though the doctors made it clear his heart would need ongoing care medication follow-ups, he could never have afforded on his own. Michael quietly handled it before Emma even had the chance to worry about it out loud. Don't, he said when Emma tried to protest. This isn't charity. This is what family does. Tyler's situation resolved almost as fast, though not without complications. CPS opened a full investigation into the group home. Within days and within a week, 2 other kids from the same facility had come forward independently, with matching allegations against the same administrator Emma had confronted in that parking lot. The case moved quickly once actual evidence started stacking up, and Tyler was placed into emergency foster care with a family the club had personally vetted, people Michael had known for years, people whose home Emma visited herself before agreeing it was safe enough for Tyler to go. But it wasn't without pushback. 3 days after the confrontation in the parking lot, the same administrator, Denise Ashcroft, resurfaced, not through official channels, but through a message posted to a local community forum, one that spread faster than Emma expected anything on the internet could spread in a city the size of Phoenix. Local group homeworker accuses biker gang of coercing minor into custody transfer. Homeless woman with unknown ties to motorcycle club allegedly interfered with lawful custody proceedings. Emma read it, standing in the clubhouse kitchen, phone shaking in her hands, Cruz reading over her shoulder with a scowl darkening across his face. "She's twisting everything," Emma said, voice tight with disbelief. "She's making it sound like we kidnapped him." "She's trying to save her own job," Cruz said grimly, "and maybe keep herself out of a courtroom. This is a smear campaign, plain and simple." "Can she do that? Just post lies about us and get away with it?" "She can post whatever she wants," Michael said, walking in just in time to catch the tail end of it, jaw set hard. "Doesn't mean it'll hold up, but it means we need to be smart about how we handle this. People already have opinions about this club before they know a single fact about us. Give them a headline like that, and a lot of folks won't wait around for the truth." Emma's stomach twisted. "This is my fault. If I hadn't gotten involved—" "Stop," Victoria said, wheeling herself into the kitchen, legs still elevated in its brace expression, fierce despite her injuries. "Do not do that. Do not take responsibility for a woman covering up abuse by attacking the person who exposed her. That's exactly what she wants you to do." "But if it comes back on the club—" "The club has survived worse than an angry administrator with a grudge," Michael said. "What matters right now is Tyler, his placement, his safety, and making sure the actual investigation into that group home doesn't get derailed by noise on some community forum." It was Diesel, oddly enough, who came up with a solution. 2 days later, a woman on the local news desk who'd covered stories about the club before fairly without the usual sensationalism most outlets leaned into. He made a call. Within a day, a reporter named Angela Ruiz showed up at the clubhouse asking for an interview notebook and hand recorder already running. Emma nearly refused. "I don't do interviews," she said, backing toward the door the second Angela introduced herself. "I don't do cameras. I don't do any of this." "Emma," Victoria's voice was gentle but firm, catching her before she could disappear entirely. "I know this isn't who you on. I know the last thing you want is attention. But right now, silence is letting Denise Ashcroft control the story, and somewhere out there are other kids in that group home who are still scared to come forward because they think nobody will believe them over an adult with a title." She paused. "You didn't stay quiet when Tyler needed you. Don't go quiet now." Emma stood frozen for a long moment, weighing the terror of visibility against the memory of Tyler's shaking voice on the phone, the memory of his face when the officer told him he wasn't going back. She sat down across from Angela Ruiz and told the truth. She talked about finding Tyler behind the laundromat, about the fear in his voice, about the administrator's dismissiveness in that parking lot. She talked carefully without revealing details that weren't hers to share, about a pattern of behavior kids had been too afraid to report. She did not talk about herself, not her homelessness, not the accident, not any of it, until Angela asked directly. "People are going to want to know who you are," Angela said. "The woman in these posts online is being painted as some unstable outsider with ties to a motorcycle gang. Who are you really?" Emma sat with the question for a long moment, the same question Victoria had asked her under a bridge in the pouring rain 3 days earlier. "I'm someone who's been where Tyler is," Emma said finally. "Not exactly the same circumstances. But I know what it's like to be a kid the system stopped paying attention to. I know what it's like to need somebody to believe you and not have anybody show up." Her voice steadied as she spoke, gathering strength with each sentence. "I got involved because nobody else was going to. That's it. That's the whole story. There's no conspiracy. There's no gang coercion. There's just a scared kid who needed an adult to actually listen to him for once." The piece ran 2 days later, fair and direct, quoting the officer's statement about the credible allegation referencing the 2 other children who'd since come forward and characterizing Emma not as some unstable outsider, but as, in Angela's own words, someone who chose to get involved when it would have been far easier to walk away. The online post from Denise Ashcroft quietly disappeared within 24 hours. 2 weeks after that news broke that she had been placed on administrative leave pending a full state investigation into the facility. Emma should have felt relief. Instead, she felt exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated, her face now attached to a story people across the city had read, her name suddenly known beyond the invisible network of people who lived under bridges and behind shopping centers. For 3 years, invisibility had been her armor. Now it was gone, stripped away in the span of a single news article, and she didn't know yet whether that loss would end up being a wound or a door. It was Victoria who noticed something was wrong first. Nearly 2 weeks after the accident, with Walt recovering steadily and Tyler settling into his new placement with the club, having quietly folded Emma into its rhythms in ways she still hadn't fully processed, a room at the clubhouse she hadn't yet agreed to move into, permanently meals appearing in front of her without anyone making a production of it, Michael introducing her to people simply as David's daughter, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Victoria found Emma sitting alone outside, staring at nothing, arms wrapped around her knees in a posture that looked painfully familiar. "You look like you're bracing for something," Victoria said, easing herself into the chair beside her, leg brace still stiff around her knee. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart," Emma admitted quietly. "All of it. This," she gestured vaguely at the clubhouse behind them. "The room, the meals, the way everyone just, I don't know, accepted me, like I've always been here. I keep waiting for the moment somebody realizes it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." "You don't know that," Emma said, and there was real fear in her voice now, the kind she'd kept buried under practicality and forward motion for 2 straight weeks. "You know me for 2 weeks, Victoria, 2 weeks. I could be anybody under all this. I could be lying about things I could—" "Emma," Victoria's voice cut through gently but firmly, "I have known plenty of people my whole life who lied to get something from me. I know exactly what that looks like. It does not look like a girl giving up her only jacket to a stranger in the freezing rain. It does not look like someone risking her own safety to pull a scared kid out of a bad situation with absolutely nothing to gain from it. I've had 19 years less time to know you than most people, but I've had a lifetime of practice reading people who want something. You're not one of them." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't know how to just believe that." "I know," Victoria said softly. "I don't expect you to nod overnight. Trust isn't something you flip a switch on after 3 years of learning the opposite. But I need you to understand something, Emma, and I need you to really hear it." She reached over, took Emma's bandaged hand carefully in her own. "You are not a project. You are not a charity case. You are not something we're doing out of guilt because your father left before he ever met you. You are David's daughter, and you are the girl who saved my life. And more than either of those things, you are somebody worth knowing entirely on your own. Even if none of the rest of it were true. Even if you'd been a stranger off the street with no connection to this club at all." Emma's composure cracked, tears slipping free before she could stop them. "Why does that make it harder to believe, not easier?" "Because you've spent 3 years teaching yourself that nobody means it when they say things like that," Victoria said. "And unlearning that takes time. We're not going anywhere, Emma. We're not in a hurry. Take whatever time you need." They sat in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that didn't ask anything of either of them, and Emma let herself for just a few minutes stop bracing for the fall. It was shattered by the sound of a phone ringing inside the clubhouse, Michael's voice picking up tense and clipped in a way that made both women straighten instantly. Michael appeared in the doorway a minute later, face-pale, phone still in his hand. "That was the hospital," he said. "Walt?" Emma was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "What happened?" "They said his heart's showing signs of failing," Michael said, voice tight. "They need to talk to whoever's listed as his emergency contact." "Emma, they said your name." Emma's stomach dropped straight through the floor, the fragile peace of the last few minutes shattering into pure cold panic. "Take me there," she said. "Now, Stoazam." The drive to the hospital felt like the longest of Emma's life. Crews weaving through traffic with an urgency that matched the fear clawing up her throat. She barely registered arriving, barely registered the walk from the parking lot to the cardiac unit, every thought consumed by the memory of Walt's trembling hand gripping hers in the ambulance, the memory of his voice cracking a joke even while fighting for breath. "Not him too. Please, not him too." The doctor met her outside Walt's room, expression grave in the particular way doctors train themselves to deliver bad news without losing their composure. "Are you Emma?" he asked. "Yes. Is he?" "He's stable right now," the doctor said, and Emma's knees nearly buckled with relief before he continued. "But I won't sugarcoat this for you. His heart is significantly weaker than we initially realized. The cardiac events over the past 2 weeks have caused damage that's going to require ongoing intensive treatment, possibly surgery depending on how the next round of tests come back." "Whatever it costs," Michael said immediately, stepping up beside Emma. "We'll cover it." The doctor nodded slowly. "That will help enormously, but I need to be honest with both of you. His prognosis depends heavily on more than just financial resources. It depends on him having reasons to fight and support systems in place for the recovery. Men his age and his previous circumstances." He paused delicately. "Patients who've experienced prolonged homelessness often face additional complications. Malnutrition, untreated conditions that have gone unmanaged for years. His body has a lot working against it." Emma felt sick. All those months, all those years, she'd watched Walt slowly deteriorate under that bridge, and told herself she was doing enough, sharing what little food she had, checking on him every morning, and it had never once been enough. Not really, not against years of exposure and hunger, and a system that had let a sick old man rot on a sidewalk without so much as a checkup. "Can I see him?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "He's asking for you," the doctor said. "Go ahead." Walt looked smaller than she remembered, even from just 2 days before, tubes and wires multiplying across his frail body. But his eyes found her the second she stepped through the door, and something in them lit up despite everything. "There she is," he rasped. Emma crossed to his bedside and took his hand, careful of the IV tape there, tears already threatening. "You're supposed to be getting better, not worse. We had a deal." "Body's got other plans," Walt said, attempting a smile that came out weaker than his usual grin. "Don't you go crying over me, kid. I've had a good long run." "Don't talk like that," Emma said fiercely. "You're not allowed to talk like that." "Emma," Walt's grip tightened slightly, as much strength as he could manage. "I lived under that bridge for 6 years before you ever showed up. Nobody so much as looked at me twice in all that time. You're the first person who ever treated me like I still mattered." His voice wavered. "Whatever happens next, I need you to know that mattered more than any hospital, any medicine. You gave me that. Nobody can take that back." Emma pressed his hands to her cheek, tears falling freely now. "You're going to fight," she said. "You're going to fight, and you're going to get better, and then you're going to keep annoying me with terrible jokes for another 20 years. That's the deal now. That's what's happening." Walt let out a weak, wheezing laugh. "Bossy," he murmured. "Just like your old man, probably." Emma's breath caught. "You knew him." "Didn't know him," Walt said, "but I know his daughter. That's enough to guess he must have been somebody worth knowing." His eyes were growing, heavy exhaustion pulling at him even through the conversation. "Go on now. Let an old man rest. But Emma," he caught her hand once more before she could pull away, "don't you dare disappear on me. Not after everything." "I'm not going anywhere," Emma promised. And this time, for the first time in 3 years, she said the words and actually believed she had the power to keep them. Outside the room, Michael was waiting with a look on his face that told Emma something else had happened, something beyond Walt's condition. "What is it?" she asked, bracing herself for more bad news. "I got a call while you were in there," Michael said slowly, "from a lawyer representing Denise Ashcroft." Emma's stomach clenched. What does she want now? "She's filing a lawsuit," Michael said. "Defamation. Claims the news story destroyed her reputation, cost her a career she'd built for 15 years. And she's naming you specifically as the source of what she's calling false statements." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "She can't do that. Everything I said was true. There are 2 other kids who came forward and—" "I know," Michael said, "and our lawyers will handle it, and I don't think for 1 second she has a case that'll hold up in court. But Emma, I need you to understand something. This is going to drag on. It's going to mean depositions, statements, possibly a courtroom, possibly months of this hanging over your head right when you're trying to figure out who you even want to be in this new life you're building." Emma sank into a waiting room chair. The weight of everything, Walt's failing heart, a lawsuit threatening to unravel the last 2 weeks of hard-won progress, and the exposure she'd never wanted in the first place, crashing down all at once. Maybe I should have just kept walking, she said quietly, the old fear resurfacing with a vengeance. That night on the road, maybe I should have just stayed under the bridge. Do not say that, Victoria said sharply, wheeling herself over, having caught the tail end of the conversation. Do not you dare say that. Look what it's cost, Emma said, voice cracking. Walt's dying. There's a lawsuit with my name on it. My whole life is suddenly public because I couldn't just mind my own business for once. Your whole life is suddenly full, Victoria corrected fiercely, because you refuse to let people suffer alone. That is not a cost, Emma. That is exactly who you are, and it is exactly why every single person in this room is standing here fighting for you right now, instead of walking past you the way the rest of the world did for 3 straight years. Emma pressed her hands over her face, overwhelmed, exhausted, terrified in a way that went bone deep. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, voice muffled behind her hands. I don't know how to have people who depend on me, and people I depend on, and a lawsuit, and a dying man I love, and a family I didn't know existed a month ago. I don't know how to hold all of it at once. You don't have to hold it alone, Michael said, crouching down in front of her so they were eye level, his voice steady and certain in a way that cut through her panic. That's the whole point, Emma. That's what family means. You don't carry it by yourself anymore. Emma Munn looked up at him, at Victoria, at the quiet, unwavering certainty in both their faces and something in her chest. Something clenched tight for 3 long years, loosened just slightly, just enough to let her breathe. Promise me something, she said quietly. Anything. Promise me Walt doesn't die thinking nobody in this world would fight for him. Michael's throat worked, and he nodded, voice rough. I promise you that. Every single one of us in this club, I promise you that. Down the hallway, a monitor's alarm suddenly blared sharp and urgent, and every head in the waiting room turned toward the sound, toward Walt's room where a nurse was already running, calling for a doctor, calling for help, and Emma was on her feet before she even registered standing, terror seizing her whole body as she ran toward the one door in that hospital she could not bear to watch close. Emma reached the doorway just as 2 nurses pushed past her, a doctor already barking orders, the monitor's alarm screaming its flat, urgent rhythm through the hallway. You can't be in here right now, a nurse said, blocking Emma with an arm before she could push further into the room. That's Emma's voice broke. Please let me stay. Step back, the nurse said, not unkindly but firm, already turning away to help the team crowding around Walt's bed. We need the space. I promise the second there's news, someone will come get you. Emma stumbled backward into the hallway, chest heaving, watching through the narrow gap in the door as a doctor pressed both palms against Walt's chest, counting under his breath, the rhythmic violence of it more terrifying than anything Emma had witnessed in 3 years on the street. Michael's hand found her shoulder, steady grounding. Emma, look at me. She couldn't look away from the door. Emma, his voice sharpened just enough to cut through the haze of panic. You need to breathe. Passing out in this hallway isn't going to help him. She sucked in a ragged breath, forcing her eyes to Michael's face instead of the chaos beyond the glass. He can't die, she whispered. Not now, not after everything, not when Her voice cracked completely. I just found people who actually want me here. I can't lose him in the same breath. You're not losing anyone tonight, Victoria said, willing herself as close as she could manage, reaching up to grip Emma's trembling hand. Do you hear me? Not tonight. But even as she said it, Emma could see the fear in Victoria's eyes too. The same fear, the same helplessness, the same terrible knowledge that none of them controlled what happened behind that door. The alarm kept blaring, seconds stretched into something unbearable, something that felt like hours compressed into a handful of heartbeats, and Emma pressed her back against the hallway wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly, the way she used to rock herself to sleep under the bridge on the coldest nights. Talk to me, Michael said, crouching in front of her again. Tell me about him. Tell me something about Walt. Emma looked up confused. What? Tell me something, Michael pressed. Anything. A memory. Keep your mind on anything other than that door. Emma's breath hitched, but she understood what he was doing, the same thing she'd done for Walt, in the back of that ambulance, keeping him talking, keeping him anchored to something other than fear. He used to keep a deck of cards, Emma said slowly, voice shaking. Missing the 2 of hearts, but he never let anyone throw it out. Said a deck with a missing card was still a deck, long as you knew how to work around the gap. Her voice wavered. We'd play gin rummy some nights when I had the energy. He always let me win the first couple hands, thought I didn't notice. Then he'd get serious and wipe the floor with me the rest of the night. Michael managed a small, pained smile. Sounds like a good man. He is, Emma said fiercely, present tense, refusing to let it slip into past. He's the first person on the street who ever treated me like I mattered. Before you, before Victoria, before any of this. Her voice broke on the last word. I can't lose him, Michael. I can't. The door to Walt's room opened. Every head in the hallway turned at once. The doctor stepped out, mask pulled down expression unreadable in the fluorescent light, and Emma's entire body went rigid, bracing for words she wasn't sure she could survive hearing. He's stable, the doctor said. The words took a full second to land Emma's mind, refusing to process them, at first terror still gripping every nerve in her body. He's okay, she managed. His heart stopped for almost 40 seconds, the doctor said carefully. We got it restarted. He's alive and he's stable for now, but I won't lie to you, this was serious. We're moving forward with surgery as soon as he's strong enough. Without it, I don't think his heart survives another episode like this one. Emma's legs finally gave out entirely, and Michael caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently the rest of the way, her whole body shaking with a release of terror that had nowhere left to go but out. Can I see him? She whispered. Briefly, the doctor said. He's weak, but yes. Emma walked into that room on legs that didn't feel like her own, and the sight of Walt, paler than before, more wires than ever snaking from his frail body, eyes barely open, nearly broke her all over again. Hey there, he rasped, voice paper thin. You scared me half to death. Emma choked out, gripping his hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Scared myself too, Walt admitted. Saw a bright light and everything. Real cliche if you ask me. Figured the universe could have been more original. Emma let out a wet, broken laugh despite everything pressing her forehead to the back of his hand. Don't do that again, she whispered. Please don't do that again. Wasn't exactly my plan, Walt murmured, already fading exhaustion pulling him under. But Emma, before I go under again, I need you to hear something. I'm listening. Whatever happens in that surgery, Walt said, each word costing him visible effort. You did more for me in 2 weeks than the rest of the world did in 6 years. You hear me? Don't you go blaming yourself if something happens. You gave me the best 2 weeks I've had since before I lost everything. That's not nothing, kid. That's everything. Emma couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she simply nodded. Tears falling silently onto the back of his hand as his eyes drifted closed. Sleep, real sleep, not the terrifying stillness of moments before, finally claiming him. The surgery was scheduled for 4 days later, giving Walt's body time to stabilize enough to survive the procedure. Those 4 days stretched into the longest of Emma's life, split between sitting at Walt's bedside and dealing with the mounting pressure of Denise Ashcroft's lawsuit, which had begun moving faster than anyone anticipated. On the second day, Emma sat across a conference table from the club's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Kwan, who laid out exactly what Emma was facing. She's claiming your statements to the reporter were made with reckless disregard for the truth, Patricia explained, sliding a folder across the table. Her lawyer is painting you as someone with a documented history of instability, homelessness, no fixed address, no verifiable employment history, implying you're an unreliable witness whose words shouldn't have been trusted by a journalist in the first place. Emma's stomach twisted. So being homeless makes me a liar now? That's not what they're saying outright, Patricia said carefully, but it's the implication they're hoping a judge picks up on. It's an old tactic attack, the credibility of the witness instead of the substance of the claim. The claim is true, Emma said, frustration bleeding into her voice. 2 other kids came forward. There's an active state investigation. How does any of that change because I used to sleep under a bridge? It doesn't legally, Patricia said, but perception matters in these cases, especially before it ever reaches a courtroom. I need you prepared for the fact that this might get uglier before it gets better. They may try to dig into your past, your mother's death, anything they think might rattle you into backing down or settling. Emma sat with that for a long moment, old fear and new resolve warring in her chest. I'm not backing down, she said finally. I told the truth. If she wants to drag my past into a courtroom to try and discredit that, let her. I'm not ashamed of where I came from." Patricia's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across her face. "Good, because I don't think you should be." Michael, sitting quietly beside Emma through the entire meeting, reached over and squeezed her hand once the lawyer excused herself to make a call. "You didn't have to be that strong in there," he said. "Nobody would have blamed you for being scared." "I am scared," Emma admitted, "but I'm done letting fear decide what I do. I did that for 3 years. Look where it got me, invisible, and it still didn't protect me from anything. Might as well be visible and scared if the alternative is hiding and still hurting." Something in Michael's face softened with unmistakable pride. "David would have loved you," he said quietly. "I mean that. Whatever his failures, whatever mistakes he made, the man who rode with us for 6 years had exactly that kind of fire in him. Watching you now, it's like watching pieces of him I haven't thought about in 20 years. Emma's throat tightened. "I wish I could have known him." "I know," Michael said. "I wish that for you too." The morning of Walt's surgery arrived cold and gray, and Emma sat in the waiting room flanked by Victoria, Michael, and half a dozen club members who had shown up simply because Emma mattered to them, and by extension, so did Walt. Cruz brought coffee, nobody drank. Diesel paced the hallway in slow, restless circuits. Tyler, granted a few hours away from his new foster placement, sat pressed against Emma's side, silent and solemn, holding her hand the way she'd once held his outside that laundromat. "He's tougher than he looks," Tyler offered quietly, trying to fill the terrible silence. "He really is," Emma agreed, though her voice shook. The surgery was supposed to take 3 hours. It stretched into 4, then 5 each passing minute, tightening the knot in Emma's stomach until she could barely breathe around it. She paced. She sat. She paced again. Victoria eventually pulled her down into the seat beside her and simply held her hand, saying nothing, offering the only comfort that existed in a moment like this, presence, steady and unwavering. At the 5-hour, 40-minute mark, the surgeon finally emerged, mask hanging around his neck. Exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Emma shot to her feet so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. "The surgery went well," the surgeon said, and the entire waiting room seemed to exhale at once. "It was more complicated than we initially anticipated. We found additional blockage we hadn't seen on the imaging, but we were able to address everything. He's in recovery now. It's going to be a long road, but barring complications, I expect a full recovery." Emma's knees buckled with relief, and this time it was Cruz who caught her, steadying her upright as sobs of pure, overwhelming relief broke free. "He's okay," she gasped. "He's really okay." "He's really okay," the surgeon confirmed, allowing himself a small, tired smile at the sight of the room's collective relief. The celebration that followed was quiet but fierce. Victoria crying openly. Michael's arm wrapped tight around Emma's shoulders, Tyler grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. Cruz and Diesel exchanging the kind of relieved, wordless nod that men like them used instead of tears. It was for one clean, uncomplicated moment. Pure joy. It didn't last. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, a number she didn't recognize, and something in her gut told her not to ignore it. "Hello, Emma Parker," a clipped, professional voice asked. "Speaking." "This is Karen Voss. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Sentinel. I'm calling regarding the lawsuit filed against you by Denise Ashcroft and additional information that's come to light regarding your background." Emma's stomach dropped. "What information?" "We've obtained records indicating you have a juvenile arrest for shoplifting dated approximately 2 years ago," Voss said, voice flat, clinical, utterly indifferent to the way each word landed like a blow. "We're preparing a story examining whether someone with your history should be considered a credible witness in matters involving child welfare allegations. I'm calling to give you the opportunity to comment before we publish." Emma's blood ran cold. The shoplifting charge, a can of soup and a loaf of bread stolen from a gas station during the worst week of her first winter on the street, when hunger had made her reckless in a way she still hated herself for, had been dismissed months later after a judge reviewed her circumstances. It was supposed to have been sealed. It was supposed to have been over. "That was 2 years ago," Emma said, voice unsteady. "It was dismissed. I was homeless and hungry and a judge." "I understand there are mitigating circumstances," Voss said in a tone that suggested she understood nothing of the sort. "But our readers deserve to know the full picture of who's making these allegations against Ms. Ashcroft." Do you have a comment? Emma stood frozen in the middle of a hospital waiting room that had 30 seconds earlier been filled with pure relief and felt the ground shift beneath her feet all over again. I need to call you back. She managed and hung up before Voss could respond, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Emma, Victoria's voice cut through the fog, alarmed by the sudden change in her expression. What is it? What happened? They found it, Emily whispered. They found the arrest. The room went quiet, confused. What arrest? Michael asked carefully. Emma's face burned with a shame she thought she'd buried 2 years ago. I stole food, she said, voice barely above a whisper. My first winter on the street. I was so hungry I couldn't think straight, and I took a can of soup and some bread from a gas station, and I got caught and I was arrested. It was dismissed. The judge saw the circumstances, saw it was survival, not anything malicious. It was supposed to be sealed. It was supposed to be over. Her voice cracked. But some reporter found it, and now they're going to run a story asking if a shoplifter should be trusted to make allegations against Denise Ashcroft. Michael's jaw tightened, fury flickering across his face. That's disgusting. Taking a can of soup because you were starving isn't the same thing as, it doesn't matter what it's actually the same as, Emma cut in, panic rising in her voice. It matters what it looks like in a headline. Homeless woman with criminal history behind explosive group home allegations. That's the story they're going to run, Michael. That's what people are going to read, and they're not going to read the part about the judge dismissing it. They're not going to read about why I did it. They're just going to see criminal and homeless and decide I made the whole thing up. Emma, Victoria's voice was steady, cutting through the spiral. Look at me. Emma forced her eyes to Victoria's face, chest heaving. You did nothing wrong, Victoria said firmly. Not that night at the gas station, and not one single thing since. A judge agreed with that, the court record agrees with that, and anyone with a functioning conscience reading that story is going to see exactly what it is, a desperate, hungry teenager who made one small mistake trying to survive, and a woman running a smear campaign to distract from the fact that she let children get hurt on her watch. You don't know that people will see it that way, Emma said, her voice trembling. I know how this works. I know what people think when they hear the word homeless. I've spent 3 years watching it happen. Nobody sees the reasons. They just see the label. Then we make sure they see the reasons. Michael said something hardening in his voice, decisive and immediate. Patricia, he called to the lawyer who'd been standing quietly a few feet away through the entire exchange. Get ahead of this, today, before that story runs. Patricia was already pulling out her phone. I'll draft a statement. We get the full context out first in our words before anyone else controls the narrative. Emma sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed the whiplash of the day Walt's surgery, the relief, and now this leaving her feeling like she'd been hollowed out. I'm so tired, she admitted quietly to no one in particular. I'm so tired of fighting for the right to just exist without being punished for how I survived. Tyler, still sitting beside her, slipped his hand into hers without a word, the same silent solidarity she'd offered him days earlier. You're not fighting alone, Victoria said, wheeling closer, taking Emma's other hand. That's the difference now, Emma. That's the whole difference. The story ran anyway 2 days later, despite Patricia's efforts, though the club's preemptive statement detailing the circumstances of the dismissed charge, emphasizing the judge's own finding that it stemmed from desperate survival rather than criminal intent, softened its impact considerably. Still, the comment sections beneath the article were exactly as brutal as Emma had feared. Strangers she'd never met dissecting her worth as a human being based on a can of soup she'd stolen out of hunger 2 winters ago. She read every comment. She couldn't stop herself even as each one cut deeper, even as Victoria begged her to put the phone down. Once a criminal, always a criminal. This is what happens when you let homeless people insert themselves into other people's business. Sounds like she's using this biker family connection to launder her image. Emma sat curled on the couch in the small room she still hadn't officially agreed to call hers, phone screen glowing in the dim light, each comment landing like a fresh wound on top of ones that had never fully healed. The door opened quietly. Victoria, still moving carefully on her healing leg, eased herself down beside Emma without asking permission. Give me the phone, she said gently. I need to see what they're saying. No, Victoria said firmer, now gently prying it from Emma's fingers despite her weak protest. You don't. You need to see what the people who actually know you are saying. not strangers hiding behind usernames who've never once had to choose between eating and staying out of trouble. Emma's eyes filled exhaustion and hurt tangled together. What if they're right, though? What if I really am just... Don't, Victoria said sharply, cutting her off before the sentence could finish forming. Don't you dare finish that thought. I watched you lift a motorcycle off my body with a piece of scrap metal because you couldn't stand the thought of me dying alone. I watched you run headfirst toward a scared kid without a single thought for your own safety. I watched you sit beside a dying old man's bed for 4 straight days because you refused to let him face surgery without someone in his corner. Her voice broke fierce and unwavering. That is who you are, Emma. Not a headline, not a comment section, not one desperate decision made during the worst winter of your life. You. Emma broke down completely, then months and years of exhaustion and shame and grief finally spilling out all at once, and Victoria simply pulled her close, careful of her healing ribs, and held her the way Emma realized through the haze of tears a mother might have held her if the world had been even a little kinder to both of them. I don't know how to stop being afraid that all of this disappears, Emma admitted into Victoria's shoulder. That I wake up tomorrow and it's all been some strange, impossible dream, and I'm back under that bridge and none of this ever happened. It's not a dream, Victoria said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of Emma's head. And I promise you, Emma, for as long as I have breath in my body, you are never going back under that bridge. Not unless you choose to help someone else the way you've always done. Never because you have nowhere else to go. Down the hallway, Emma's phone, now in Victoria's possession, began to buzz insistently. Victoria glanced at the screen, brow furrowing. It's Patricia, she said, answering quickly. Patricia, it's Victoria. Emma's not really in a place to... She stopped mid-sentence, listening, her face shifting from concern to something sharper, more alert. Say that again, Victoria said slowly. Emma sat up, wiping her eyes, watching Victoria's expression change in real time. What is it? Emma asked. What's she saying? Victoria lowered the phone slightly, staring at Emma with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and fierce protective anger. Patricia says Denise Ashcroft's own attorney just withdrew from representing her, Victoria said slowly. Effective immediately. And there's a reason. She paused, gathering herself. The state investigation into the group home just turned up documented evidence, internal emails showing Ashcroft knew about the abuse allegations against her administrator for over a year before any of this happened. She didn't just fail to investigate them, Emma. She actively buried 3 separate complaints to protect her facility's licensing status. Emma's breath caught. She knew, Victoria confirmed. The entire time she was accusing you of lying, of fabricating some conspiracy with the club, she knew children had been reporting abuse for over a year, and she chose her budget over their safety. The lawsuit, Emma understood in that moment, was about to fall apart entirely. Not because of anything Emma had done or said, but because the truth, however long it took, however much damage it did on the way, had finally caught up with the person who tried hardest to bury it. But even as relief began to unfurl in her chest, Emma couldn't shake the small, cold voice reminding her that somewhere in this city 3 winters ago, a hungry teenage girl had made one desperate choice that strangers would now use to define her forever, regardless of how this lawsuit ended, regardless of how many people finally saw the truth about Denise Ashcroft. Some wounds, Emma was learning, didn't close just because justice finally arrived. Some of them stayed open long enough to ask her a much harder question, whether she was ready to stop hiding the parts of herself she was most ashamed of, and let the people who loved her see all of it, not just the parts that made for a good headline. Patricia's voice came through the phone again, steadier now, more clinical, the way lawyers sounded when they'd shifted from crisis management into strategy. Emma, I need you to hear the rest of this because it changes everything about where we go from here. Victoria put the phone on speaker and set it on the table between them, and Emma leaned forward, wiping the last of her tears away, bracing herself. Ashcroft's lawyer withdrew because continuing to represent her exposed the firm to its own liability, Patricia continued. Once those internal emails surfaced showing she'd buried 3 prior complaints, this stopped being a defamation case and became a criminal matter. The state's already moved to file child endangerment charges against her directly, multiple counts. So the lawsuit against me, Emma started, is dead, Patricia said flatly. No attorney in the state is going to attach their name to representing someone who knowingly covered up abuse suing the teenager who exposed it. She'll likely withdraw the suit herself within the week to avoid the optics, or her new counsel will advise her to. Either way, Emma, this is over. You won. The word landed strangely in Emma's chest, won, because it didn't feel like winning, not entirely. It felt like surviving something that should never have been a fight in the first place. What about the article? Emma asked quietly. The one about my arrest that's still out there. People already read it. People already decided what they think of me. There was a pause on the line, and when Patricia spoke again, her voice had softened. I can't undo what's already been read, Emma. Nobody can. But I can tell you this, the Sentinel is already facing questions about running that story in the first place, timed exactly when it was sourced from records that should have stayed sealed. There's talk of a follow-up piece this time focused on the full context, on the judge's ruling, on why you were in that gas station that night to begin with. Emma pressed her palms against her eyes. I don't want to be a story, Patricia. I never wanted to be a story. I know, Patricia said gently, but sometimes the story finds you whether you want it or not. The only choice you get is whether you let it be told honestly or you let other people tell it for you. After the call ended, the room fell quiet, just the two of them, Victoria's hand still resting on Emma's back in slow, steady circles. You don't have to decide anything tonight, Victoria said. Not about interviews, not about follow-up articles, not about any of it. Tonight you just get to feel whatever you're feeling. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore, Emma admitted, voice raw. A month ago I was nobody, invisible. Now I'm David Reyes's daughter and the girl who saved you, and the girl who exposed a group home, and the girl who stole a can of soup 2 winters ago, and I don't know how to hold all of those at once and still feel like myself underneath it. You don't have to hold all of it at once, Victoria said. You just have to hold the truth. And the truth, Emma, is simpler than you're making it. You're a girl who never once in 3 years of losing everything stopped trying to take care of people. Every other label the world slaps on you is just noise around that one fact. Emma let herself lean into Victoria's shoulder again, and for the first time in days, the exhaustion pulling at her felt less like dread and more like something she might actually be allowed to rest into. Walt's recovery stretched across the following 3 weeks, slow and uneven. The way real healing always was, good days followed by frightening setbacks, followed by more good days that gradually began to outnumber the bad. Emma visited every single one of those days, sometimes for hours, sometimes for only a few stolen minutes between the demands of a life that had almost overnight become full in ways she'd never had to manage before. She was there the day he first stood on his own without assistance, gripping the bed rail with white-knuckled determination, refusing help even as his legs trembled. I don't need it, he insisted, waving off the nurse hovering nearby. Walt, Emma said, arms crossed, unimpressed. You had open heart surgery 3 weeks ago. Let the woman help you. Bossy, Walt muttered, but he let the nurse steady his arm anyway, and Emma caught the flicker of a smile he tried to hide. She was there the day he took his first real steps down the hallway, slow and shuffling, Emma matching his pace, exactly refusing to walk even a half step ahead of him. You don't have to baby me, he grumbled. I'm not babying you, Emma said. I'm making sure you don't fall and give me another heart attack of my own. Cheeky, Walt said, but his eyes were bright alive in a way Emma hadn't seen since before the accident, and something about watching him fight his way back to himself, step by stubborn step, felt like watching proof that some things really could be rebuilt even after they'd nearly been lost for good. It was during one of those hallway walks 3 weeks after the surgery that Walt finally asked the question Emma had been quietly dreading. You gonna tell me about that newspaper article? He said, not quite a question. Or are we gonna keep pretending I didn't see you crying about it in the corner 3 weeks back? Emma's steps faltered. You saw that. Kid, I had a tube down my throat and a monitor stuck to my chest, not my eyes shut, Walt said dryly. I saw plenty, I just didn't have the breath to ask about it till now. Emma exhaled slowly, and somewhere in the space of that hallway with no one else around to hear, she found herself telling Walt the whole thing, the arrest, the shame, the article, the comment sections she still hadn't fully stopped reading, even when she knew better. Walt listened without interrupting his pace, slow and steady beside her, until she finished. You know what I did my first winter on the street, he said finally. Emma shook her head. Broke into a church pantry, Walt said. Middle of December, colder than anything I'd ever survived. Took canned goods, a blanket off a pew, Even took the collection box, God forgive me, though there wasn't but $11 in it. He shrugged. Got caught 2 blocks away. Pastor could have pressed charges. Instead, he sat me down, fed me a real meal, and told me hungry men do what hungry men have to do, and the Lord judges intentions, not desperation. That's different, Emma said. You didn't get arrested. No, Walt agreed. I got lucky that one particular night with that one particular pastor. You got a judge who saw the same thing that pastor saw and ruled the same way. Difference is my story never made the papers. He stopped walking, turning to look at her directly. Doesn't make what I did any less desperate than what you did. Doesn't make you any more of a criminal than it made me one. Some folks just get the luxury of their worst moments staying private. You didn't get that luxury. That's the only difference, kid. That's it. Emma's eyes stung. I keep waiting for people to look at me and only see the arrest, only see homeless girl with a record. Some will, Walt said honestly. Some people are small enough that a headline's all they'll ever need to make up their mind about somebody. But Emma, he reached out, gripping her hand with more strength than she expected from a man 3 weeks out of open-heart surgery. The people who matter, the people worth keeping close. They're gonna look past a can of soup to see the girl who lifted a motorcycle off a stranger, who sat by an old man's hospital bed for 4 straight days, who pulled a scared kid out of a bad situation without a second thought for herself. That's who you are. Anybody who can't see that past one desperate night 2 years back isn't worth losing sleep over. Emma pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of his healing chest, and Walt patted her back awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with sentiment, but not pulling away either. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, Walt said gruffly. Just get me back to my room. All this walking's made me hungry, and I intend to complain loudly about hospital food until somebody smuggles me something decent. The follow-up article ran 2 weeks later, exactly as Patricia had predicted. A longer, more thorough piece this time, written by a different reporter entirely, one who'd actually taken the time to review the full court record, to interview the judge who dismissed the original charge, to speak with the pastor from a shelter Emma had once relied on, who described in his own words the countless desperate, decent people forced into impossible choices by hunger and cold. The piece didn't erase what had already been said about Emma. It didn't undo every cruel comment already written in some stranger's idle 5 minutes online. But it shifted something quietly, the way truth sometimes did when given enough room to breathe. And slowly the narrative Denise Ashcroft had tried to build around Emma's past began to crumble under the weight of context she'd never wanted anyone to examine too closely. Denise Ashcroft herself was arraigned on multiple counts of child endangerment. 3 weeks after that, her mugshot running in the same local paper that had once run a headline questioning Emma's credibility. Emma didn't feel triumphant when she saw it. She felt mostly a quiet, aching relief that Tyler and the other children who'd come forward would finally see some measure of accountability, relief that no other kid would suffer the way they had under a system that had been too slow, too indifferent, too willing to look away. Feels strange. Emma admitted to Victoria that evening, staring at the article on her phone. I thought I'd feel something bigger, vindicated maybe. Instead, I just feel tired. That's what real justice feels like most of the time, Victoria said. Not triumphant, just quiet, like something heavy finally being set down after you've carried it too long. Emma set the phone aside and looked at Victoria properly. Really looked at her, healed considerably. Now the wheelchair traded for a cane she still needed some days. The woman who'd once begged a stranger not to let her die alone, now sitting across from her in a kitchen that had slowly, without either of them quite marking the exact moment, become something Emma thought of as home. Can I ask you something? Emma said. Anything. Do you regret it? Emma asked. That night, if you could go back and choose a different road, a different route, avoid the accident entirely, would you? Victoria considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things Emma asked her these days, without rushing toward an easy answer. No, Haku, she said finally. I've thought about that a lot, actually, lying in that hospital bed with nothing else to do but think. And the answer keeps coming back the same. That accident was the worst physical pain I've experienced in my life. But it's also the reason I found you. And Emma, if the price of finding you was a broken leg and cracked ribs and 6 weeks of recovery, I'd pay that price every single time without hesitation. Emma's throat tightened. I still don't fully understand how you can mean that. You will, Victoria said. Someday when you have someone in your own life who matters that much to you, you'll understand exactly what I mean. Some people are worth any cost. You're one of them, Emma. You always will be. 5 weeks after the accident, Walt was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions about medication, diet, and follow-up appointments, and nowhere to actually go since the space under the bridge that had been his home for 6 years was hardly suitable for a man recovering from open-heart surgery. Emma had already anticipated the problem and spent 2 days quietly working with Michael and Victoria to solve it, though she hadn't told Walt anything about it, wanting to see his face when he found out. "We rented you a place," Emma said the day of his discharge, handing him a small brass key. "Small apartment about 10 minutes from the clubhouse. Ground floor so you don't have to worry about stairs. Furnished. First year's rent already covered." Walt stared at the key like it might dissolve in his palm if he looked away. "Emma, I can't." "You can," Emma said firmly, "and you're going to, because I am not spending the next however many years of my life worrying about whether you're warm enough or fed enough or close enough to a hospital if something happens again. This isn't charity, Walt. This is exactly what you told me family does." Walt's eyes filled and he turned away quickly, pretending to study the key more closely than it deserved, clearing his throat roughly. "Careful," he muttered. "Man's heart's still healing. Can't be doing this to me." "Too bad," Emma said, grinning despite the tears in her own eyes. "You're stuck with us now." He moved into the apartment 3 days later, and Emma spent that first weekend helping him arrange furniture stock, a small kitchen with food he actually liked, and set up a card table by the window where that very first night they played gin rummy until nearly midnight, Walt winning 4 hands out of 6 and gloating about it the entire time. "Some things don't change," Emma said, laughing as he swept another wind toward himself. "No," Walt agreed, glancing around the small apartment, modest but warm, and entirely his own for the first time in 6 years. "Some things don't, and some things," he added more quietly, "change more than a man ever thought they could." Tyler's situation, too, moved steadily towards something like resolution over the following month. The foster family Michael had vetted proved to be exactly the kind of steady, patient people Tyler needed, not perfect, not without their own struggles, but consistent in a way Tyler had never experienced before, showing up for him day after day without wavering. Emma visited often, watching him slowly unclench from the wary defensive posture he'd carried the day she found him behind that laundromat. Watching him start tentatively to let himself believe that maybe this placement wouldn't disappear the way every other promise in his life had. "They're talking about adoption," Tyler told her one afternoon, sitting on the porch steps of his new home, voice careful like he was afraid saying it out loud might jinx it. "The foster family, they asked if I'd be okay with it eventually once everything with the investigation settles." "How do you feel about that?" Emma asked. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Scared," he admitted. "What if I mess it up? What if they figure out I'm not worth keeping around?" Emma's chest ached with a familiar, painful recognition. "Tyler, look at me." He did reluctantly. "You are not going to mess anything up by being yourself," Emma said. "The version of you that ran from an abuser, that told the truth even when it was terrifying, that's already proven exactly how strong and good you are. Anybody who gets the privilege of adopting you is the lucky one in that equation, not the other way around." Tyler's eyes glistened and he looked away, embarrassed by the emotion in the exact way 15-year-old boys often were. "You sound like you actually believe that." "I do believe that," Emma said, "because somebody finally taught me the same thing about myself not that long ago. Turns out it's true whether you're 15 or 19 or 55. You don't earn the right to be loved. You just have to let yourself accept it when it shows up." It was nearly 2 months after the accident when Michael called Emma into his office at the clubhouse, an expression on his face that made her stomach tighten. With old reflexive nerves, the fear of being called into a room to hear bad news never quite left, no matter how much good had happened since. "You're not in trouble," Michael said, immediately catching her expression. "Quite the opposite, actually." He slid a folder across the desk toward her, and Emma opened it hesitantly, finding paperwork inside, official-looking documents she didn't fully understand at first glance. "What is this? It's a trust," Michael said. "Established in David's name years ago, actually before he died. A portion of club dues and contributions set aside for members' families in case anything happened. David never had a chance to claim any of it because none of us knew he had a daughter. He paused, watching her carefully. It's yours, Emma. Has been legally this entire time. We just didn't know to give it to you. Emma stared at the numbers on the page, disbelief washing over her. This is Michael. This is enough for an apartment. School if I wanted it. This is what should have been yours 3 years ago, Michael said, voice thick. This is what would have kept you off that street entirely if any of us had known you existed. I can't give you back those 3 years, Emma. God knows I wish I could. But I can make sure you never have to spend another night wondering where you're going to sleep or whether you're going to eat. Emma closed the folder slowly, hands trembling, and looked up at Michael with an expression caught somewhere between overwhelming gratitude and a grief she hadn't expected to feel in this particular moment. Grief for the years that couldn't be returned, no matter how much was offered now to make up for them. I don't know how to say thank you for something this big, she admitted. You don't have to, Michael said. You already said it every single day for the last 2 months in the way you've shown up for Walt, for Tyler, for Victoria, for every single person who's crossed your path since that night on the road. You don't owe us gratitude, Emma. If anything, we owe you an apology for taking this long to find you. Emma sat with that for a long moment, the weight of the folder in her lap feeling both like an ending and a beginning all at once, the closing of one impossible chapter and the opening of a door into a life she was only just beginning to believe she deserved to walk through. She used some of the trust in the end, not for herself alone, but for something bigger. Working alongside Victoria, who had spent years quietly funding a community outreach program that provided meals, medical care, and housing assistance to Phoenix's homeless population, Emma poured herself into expanding it, not from a place of distant charity, but from lived, intimate understanding of exactly what was missing. Exactly what people like Walt and Carol, and the boy who used to sleep 3 overpasses down, actually needed, versus what well-meaning programs often assume they needed instead. She started small, a weekly meal service run out of the same shelter that had once turned her away for being full. A partnership with a free clinic willing to do outreach visits under the bridges and behind the shopping centers where people like Walt lived invisible lives, refusing to wait for patients who'd never come to them. 6 months after the accident, Emma stood in front of a small crowd shelter staff, a handful of club members, a few reporters who'd finally started covering her story with something closer to fairness than sensationalism, and cut the ribbon on a small but fully staffed daytime resource center funded in part by the trust that bore her father's name, and in part by a growing coalition of donors who'd been moved in the end, not by pity, but by respect. I used to think being invisible was the only way to survive. Emma said, her voice steady, despite the small crowd watching her, despite the cameras she still wasn't fully comfortable with. I spent 3 years believing that the less anyone noticed me, the safer I'd be. And for a long time that was true. Until the night it wasn't. She paused, finding Victoria's face in the small crowd, finding Michael beside her, finding Walt near the front, cane in hand, grinning proudly despite everything he'd been through to get there. This center exists because somebody finally noticed me, because a woman I'd never met begged me not to let her die alone, and something in me couldn't walk away from that, even though every rule I'd built my survival around told me to. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept walking that night. I try not to think about it too much, but I know exactly what happened because I didn't. And that's the only reason any of this exists. The crowd applauded, and Emma stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed, and found herself immediately wrapped in Victoria's arms, careful but fierce, followed by Michael's, followed by Walt's, followed by Tyler practically tackling her from the side in his enthusiasm. And for the first time in longer than Emma could remember, she let herself simply stand there surrounded and believe fully, without reservation, that she belonged exactly where she was standing. A full year after the accident, on a night with the same rare desert rain that had once soaked through Emma's only jacket, she found herself driving out to the old overpass on the edge of town, the one she'd once called home for 3 long years. She hadn't planned the trip. It simply pulled at her some quiet instinct she'd learned by now not to ignore. She parked nearby and walked the rest of the way, rain misting lightly around her, and found huddled beneath the same concrete pillar where she'd once slept a girl who couldn't have been older than 17. Knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and wary the second she noticed Emma approaching. "I'm not going to hurt you," Emma said gently, stopping a respectful distance away, hands visible, posture, open, everything she wished someone had shown her once on a night just like this one. The girl said nothing, watching her with the particular guardedness Emma recognized instantly, the exact same wariness she'd worn like armor for 3 long years. I used to sleep right here, Emma said, crouching down slowly, careful not to move too fast, too close. This exact spot, actually. 3 years, give or take. Rain used to come through worse than tonight. This bridge doesn't do much to keep it off. Something in the girl's expression flickered surprise, breaking through the wariness just slightly. You're lying, the girl said, voice rough with disuse. You don't look like you ever slept under a bridge. I don't anymore, Emma admitted. But I did, and I remember exactly what it felt like, thinking nobody in the world would ever notice if I disappeared. Thinking the only way to survive was making sure nobody ever saw me at all. The girl's guarded expression cracked slightly, something raw and exhausted showing through underneath. What changed? Emma thought about that question for a lean moment, thought about the crash, about Victoria's trembling hand, about the words that had broken every rule she'd built her survival around. Thought about Walt's gin rummy games and Tyler's nervous laughter, and Michael's steady, unwavering promise that she'd never have to carry anything alone again. Somebody needed help one night, Emma said finally, and I couldn't walk away, even though every part of me knew walking away was safer. And it turned out that one decision changed absolutely everything. Not because I did something heroic, just because I refused to let someone else feel as invisible as I did. The girl studied her for a long, quiet moment, rain falling steadily around them both. I don't have anywhere to go, she admitted, finally, voice small. Emma sat down beside her, right there in the mud, exactly the way she once had for a stranger wearing a leather vest and a patch that had terrified her. Then it's a good thing I know a place, Emma said gently. It's warm. Nobody there is going to ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. And I promise you, whatever brought you here tonight, whatever you've survived to make it this far, you don't have to survive it alone anymore. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She was clearly trying hard not to let fall, and Emma reached out and gently took her hand the same way Victoria had once taken hers in the pouring rain, the same way a chain of kindness had carried her from that exact spot to everything she'd become since. Don't be scared, Emma said softly, echoing words she'd once needed to hear herself. I've been exactly where you are. And I promise you this isn't the end of your story. Sometimes the worst night of your life is just the night everything finally starts to change. They sat together beneath the overpass a while longer, rain falling steadily around them until the girl's trembling finally eased, until trust, fragile, tentative, but real, began to take root where only fear had lived moments before. And as Emma finally helped her to her feet, guiding her gently toward the car, toward warmth, toward a future neither of them could have fully imagined. An hour earlier, she understood with complete and total certainty something that had taken her an entire year to fully believe. That rainy night on the road, kneeling beside a dying stranger she owed nothing to, had never truly been about saving Victoria Hayes. It had been the exact moment Emma Parker finally saved herself, and in doing so became the very thing the world had once convinced her she could never be. Somebody worth noticing, somebody worth loving, somebody who, against every single odds stacked against her, had built not just a life but a home out of nothing but a decision to stay when every instinct told her to run. And that, in the end, was the only ending this story would ever need, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness in the darkest possible moment doesn't just save one life. It changes everything that comes after for everyone who was ever brave enough to believe in it.